It sort of reminds me of the Financial Times app. I don't know if you guys, has anyone gone to the Financial, and it's weird that it's a website, but it calls itself an app. And I'm always very confused when I go to that experience trying to wrap my head around it. I didn't actually, So you think it's really important for users to be able to discover the experience through the App Store? Is that sort of where you're coming from?
For right now, I think that's how they're trained. I mean, you know, I love thinking of like ways that could be better. You know, like I said, I think add to home screen was a step, and it was like one of the initial steps for putting them on the same plane. But you know, at the end of the day, the same way they have smart banners now for get the app in the App Store, that could be the experience to add to home screen. The whole thing could be better. Yeah. In a lot of ways. So Abe, if you feel like the App Store is sort of unimportant, or sorry, if you think it's unimportant that users are able to sort of bookmark these experiences, and they just use to add to home screen, they just use bookmarks, how do you see people discovering these things if they're not through the App Store channel? Where do people discover these new experiences?
So I do think that there's brand versus platform type of discussions that undermine the success of these applications. So if you take a look at NewYorkTimes.com's iPad website, it's actually built using Sencha's technology, and you visit it and it does a UA detection and it renders an app-like experience using HTML5, and you bookmark that. And you know that's the New York Times. You're going to go and visit that, and you're going to get the. You don't know if it's a native app. I mean, you know that it looks like a native app, but it's actually delivering HTML content. So in that particular case, I think it's the brand that is very powerful. The App Store, what it's done is it's enabled smaller players to actually have somewhat of a discovery mechanism. But I will say that the number of apps that are out there, there's so many of them that you're now having problems inside of the App Store even getting discovered. So the problem's just going to continue to grow, but it's really a brand issue, and how do you get your app known, or how do you get your app noticed? And I don't think you leave it to the proprietary gods that are out there to sponsor your app of the week in order to get discovered.
So Kevin, you mentioned that you were onboarding a ton of new users through your mobile apps. How are people coming to these apps? Do they find them through the app stores, or do they find them more organically through the web?
Yeah, more organically through our mobile web. If you look at the number of user sessions, it's the highest of all of our experiences. But in terms of transactions, it's not. So they discover us there, and then we're trying to get them with, download our iPhone app or our Android app, whatever it is, whatever platform they're on. Then we try to get them into our native apps as soon as possible, because we know they're going to be more consistent users in those native experiences, and they're going to purchase more products from us. And they can sell. That's something we can't do. I mean, there's just fundamental, basic lack of technology right now in HTML5. Like, we can't do selling. We can't get access to cameras and some of those things right now. So we use our mobile web experience as the big, net in the sea, the trawler sea. We scoop them up and we get them, and we want to have that experience be really good. We've invested heavily in mobile web, and it's really good, and it's been growing rapidly. But we know that once we get them in there, we want to get them into the apps when possible.
And if you could pinpoint one or two reasons why people buy more through apps than the mobile web experience, what would those reasons be?
For some reason, people, and I think we've been kind of hinting at it, it's kind of just it's what they've been trained to do. They're more personal experiences to them. They're snappier. I mean, there's no question about it. You don't hit and wait, and there's just something about it that it feeds into the whole kind of personalized device that makes them stickier.
Okay. And Andre, sort of going to this question about whether or not the web has to be better or not, or native has to be better, do you think PhoneGap web apps could be as snappy as native apps, and people just haven't been coding them properly, or how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's two big factors there. There's the underlying power of the devices, right, that is executing the HTML and JavaScript, and those are getting better all the time, which is nice, because that's doing a lot of heavy lifting for us as HTML and JavaScript developers. And then there's also just the state of the art of how we build HTML, JavaScript, and CSS apps is improving a lot. 3 years ago, we came from the desktop environment, or sort of 5 years ago now, I guess. And it was, the desktops were really powerful then, and we had all these kind of techniques we used, and we pretty much had to throw those out the window, and we're just kind of getting back up to speed as HTML and JavaScript developers to build really fast, snappy performance apps that are written in HTML and JavaScript in the PhoneGap environment. And I think, there's a number of PhoneGap apps out there that people don't even know they're written in HTML and JavaScript.
What's your favorite one that we probably don't know about?
There's one called, well, there's a couple actually. My personal favorite is Untapped, which is a social network for beer drinkers.
We don't.
Yeah, that's a good one.
They do a lot of testing at Toby.
Yeah, exactly. lots of testing. There's a couple of games. There's like Mafia Wars, Shakedown, which is a pretty snappy app from Zynga. There's, and then there's other apps that are built with like the PhoneGap technique or this hybrid thing, which is basically PhoneGap. They've just kind of written a lot of some of the hooks themselves because they don't need all the APIs. There's an app I think Dion, you pointed me to called Feedly, which is just an amazing experience. And they're just kind of more and more out there. We don't actually know what apps are PhoneGap apps unless we download them and unpack them.
Inspect the binary or something. Yeah.
Sorry?
Unless you download them and inspect the binary or something.
Yeah, I think we were just looking at the top 100 or 200 business apps the other day, and like 5% of them are PhoneGap applications, just PhoneGap. And then there's actually more that are using UI WebView and are built in the same kind of pattern. So that's, it's really encouraging to see that segment is growing because people are just getting reuse across not only their native app platforms, but also their mobile websites, which I think is a big win in the end.
Yeah, I think engineers tend to love being able to leverage their code and things, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's been this big push of like, hey, I just want to write this, I can put it on the mobile website, I can PhoneGap it and put it in there. One of the pain points that we've heard some developers talk about is the Android ecosystem. Right. And that lovely cross-platform, build it once, it'll work across all these devices. They try it, and they get into a bit of pain. Have you guys kind of run into this pain? Do you think kind of those days are over, Chrome's coming, people are updating faster, you can write it once and it will run really well everywhere, or is there still a massive tax for getting it really to work well?
Well, yeah, I think there's still a difficulty there. I think it's more like we have a sore knee where before we had a shattered femur. So it's improving. I think the Chrome team being involved in the WebKit on Android is helping, but yeah, that's still an issue. And the fragmentation in Android is still an issue. But you have that issue if you're writing native apps too. There's just different UI conventions, different performance characteristics. So, saying that that's a problem for if you're building with web technologies is true, but it's not true that you get away from it if you just start writing natively also.
So I wonder, Jeff, if you could share a little of your experiences in the early days of Appcelerator, because your product initially tried to do cross-platform with WebKit, and you guys at some point just said, you know what, this thing isn't ready, and walked away and did the native approach you're doing now. Candidly, is it ready now if you did it right now, or do you feel like it's just it's not the right approach even still?
Yeah, we had similar to Andre and PhoneGap and talked quite a bit with them in the early days and kind of went a slightly different route than PhoneGap with the first versions of pre 1.0 Titanium. It was a web view, but we also layered native objects on top. So we would try to mask, sort of get the rendering capability, but sort of layer the native UI objects on top. And that was extremely hacky and didn't work too well. We switched in 0.8 to more of a JavaScript runtime engine and then what we call native compiled bindings, where you would define a JavaScript API. And we just sort of moved purely away from HTML5 as a web architecture into much more of a pure JavaScript-driven programming interface, and a Titanium API with the compiled native bindings and a real interpreter, and totally eliminated the WebKit or the web UI rendering. And that has given us pretty significant capabilities. I don't think we would, change that. It's allowed us to do things like our Atlantica game engine that Carlos Sakaze is over there. The ex-Corona guys have just launched recently. It's a OpenGL ES 2.0 C++ based set of modules, all particle engines and the whole thing, but you program it from JavaScript, right? And so you get sort of it's similar to GL, a WebGL, but it's sort of native bindings and native performance, 60 frames per second, really amazing graphics engine, right? And so it gives you, in our world, it's not quite the HTML5 approach because it's not standardized, but it gives you a JavaScript-driven API with native performance and cross-platform if you so desire. So we think that's a pretty good approach. Is it the right approach? No, there's plenty of different approaches. The web approach is still pretty good, But that's the approach we like, and it seems to work pretty well.